Good afternoon. Ag engineers hear me already in the back? Hey, I see thumbs up by several. So I'm Jeff Armstrong. I welcome you to our seminar today. This is a part of our ongoing program in our Future Food. We've had some individuals on campus already associated with Animal Science Seminar. Next week, as everyone's aware, the Wharton is sold out with Michael Pollan will be a speaker. We have a student-only event on the 12th of April from 3 to 4 p.m. in 102C Wilson Hall. And I would also remind you, Earth Day, April 22nd, Jason Clay, Senior Vice President of the World Wildlife Federation, one of the world's leading conservation organizations, he will present a seminar, Feeding the People and Maintaining the Planet, Meeting the Challenge by 2050. And that's going to be 5:30, same format, different location, April 22nd in 147 Communications, just across the way. Today we're delighted to have a good friend of MSU, a good friend of agriculture with us, Charlie Arnot. I've known Charlie for a few years and worked with him and been on programs with him. Charlie is the founder of CMA. It's an issues management, public relations, strategic facilitation and marketing communications firm specializing in food and agriculture. And you can see the title of his presentation today, Size Matters, Why We Love to Hate Big Food. Charlie grew up in Nebraska. He worked in agriculture, agribusiness with Premium Standard. He writes a weekly column for Feed Stuff. He's very engaged with a lot of multinational corporations. He founded the Center for Food Integrity, in which several land-grant universities and several companies are members, and we're part of a consortium for establishing a sustainable egg supply that involves Michigan State, some other universities. The Environmental Defense Fund is involved, a whole range of groups, especially McDonald's, Cargill, and others. And CFI is the one that keeps that going from a strategic perspective. So we're really fortunate to have Charlie on campus again. He's been here before and visited with classes, visited with several classes. And Charlie, we've got a really wide range of folks here on campus, students, faculty, and across colleges. And we've got quite a few of our stakeholders present with us, and we're really glad to see you all here. Thanks for being here, and you're really going to enjoy Mr. Arnot. Charlie, let's give him a welcome.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate that, and I'm thrilled to be back in Michigan. I've had the pleasure of being exposed to Michigan agriculture over the last couple of years and have developed a stronger appreciation for the tremendous strength and the diversity of those involved in food and fiber production and agriculture, and it's a real honor to come back to MSU. Size matters. Why we love to hate big food. We're going to spend some time talking about that and some models particularly that we've developed on behalf of the Center for Food Integrity, which is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to building consumer trust in the contemporary food system, which is a little different mission than most associations or organizations. We do not have a natural constituency, which is one of our great strengths. It's also a challenge, but we are focused on building consumer trust in the contemporary food system. And if you think about why people love to hate big food, it is one of the critical challenges we have in building and maintaining consumer trust in the contemporary food system. And it's hard to go to the newsstand or pick up a book or go to the movies today without seeing some challenge to contemporary food. There are lots of folks who are raising questions, legitimate questions, some informed, some better informed than others, about the contemporary U.S. food system. Who are we and what do we do and how does our food come to be? What does it look like today? Where does it come from? And what can we expect from our food system? And we did some research for the Center for Food Integrity, really looking at what drives consumer trust in food. And we identified three primary elements in some research that was peer-reviewed and published in the December edition of the Journal of Rural Sociology. The first element in building trust is influential others, which includes your family and friends, as well as credentialed individuals whose opinions you respect. The second element in building trust is competence, which is technical capacity, skills, and ability. The third element in building trust is confidence, which is the perception of shared values or ethics. Can I count on you to do what's right? And what we have found in our research over the last 3 years in surveying more than 6,000 consumers on issues of food safety and sustainability and animal welfare, nutrition, and other topics is that confidence, or the perception of shared values and ethics, is 3 to 5 times more important than demonstrating our competence in building trust. And yet historically, as we've thought about building trust in food and building trust in agriculture, what we talk about is our competence. We want it to be science-based. We need the data. We want to share the information and the data. And clearly, if we give people enough data, they will be rational, they'll make right decisions, and they'll support who we are and what we do. We have to have that data, but what we've discovered from our research is that's not what drives consumer trust. And it's part of the reason that people love to hate big food, because there is no longer that perception of shared values that they may have had previously with agriculture, with the food system, when they felt like they had a better understanding of who we were and what we did before we changed fundamentally in size and scale and types of operation and use of technology. There is no longer that perception that we share the same values in food production that we shared a generation or two ago, and it's that disconnect in shared values that undermines our trust and causes people to hate big food and to raise questions. Because I can identify with and share the values of a farmer or of a food producer or of an individual. I have a much harder time sharing the values of a system or of a corporation or of an entity that is nameless and faceless. And so it is that lack of perceived shared values that really undermines our trust and really creates that level of angst and distrust and hate for big food. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? How do we get from where we are today to where we want to be? And how can we be part of making that happen and be part of a constructive conversation that makes that happen as we continue to reach out? One of the better columns I've read on the issue in the last few months was from Russ Parsons from the LA Times, when he said, you know, the long overdue national conversation about food so far hasn't been much of a conversation. Instead, what we have are two armed camps deeply suspicious of one another, shouting past each other. And that's really what it's devolved into. We've got kind of the, if you don't trust my technology, if you challenge my system, you're obviously a Luddite who wants to drive us back to the Stone Age. Or we've got the folks that believe that if it's not grown in my backyard, if it's not local, if it's not grown by somebody who's wearing a hemp t-shirt, then obviously they're nuts. And we've kind of got those two fundamental poles shouting past each other and the rational majority going in the middle. I don't know what's going on. I'm not comfortable with my food system, but I'm not sure why, and I'd like to have a greater sense of comfort about who we are and what we do. The great thing about who we are in the food system in the United States is we provide a whole lot of choice to consumers. We have more choice about food in the U.S. than any place else. You can go to Walmart, you can go to your farmer's market, you can go to McDonald's, you can go to Chipotle. But again, we've tended to position this as either controversial foods or controversy-free foods. So you can shop in this aisle if you're in one camp, or you can shop in this aisle if you're from the other camp. The challenge is that's really a fairly simplistic way to look at a pretty complex set of issues that really challenge all of us in the food system. And if we continue to look at it as an all or nothing kind of proposition, in all likelihood we'll continue to see erosion, ongoing erosion of consumer trust and confidence in the food system. Because the reality is it's not all or nothing. It doesn't have to be one or the other. We can embrace a variety of food systems as long as we understand what they mean and where we want to go. We have folks who are saying what we really need to do is simply roll back the clock. We need to roll back the clock to how we produced food back in the 1950s and slow things down. And if we do that, that's the right answer. The question is this the ethical choice? Is that the right choice for people, animals, and the planet? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're charged to do in the food system. We are charged to make the right choice, to do the right thing for people, animals, and the planet. So what is that? And what is the process we go through to begin to discern what the right thing is for people, animals, and the planet? I want to provide a little perspective on that today and then hopefully engage in some discussion, because there are a variety of perspectives and we will be enlightened by hearing those and having a discussion about those in the room. As we think about what a sustainable balance is at the Center for Food Integrity, we use the triangle as the metaphor because of its incredible structural integrity. And I'm glad we're in the engineering building because I can finally use this with some real credibility. If you were to go into the roof of this building, you would see row after row of triangles in the trusses because of their incredible structural integrity. They are the strongest shape known to design engineering, and they have tremendous load-bearing capacity because they can transfer loads through tension and compression. And so we want to use that as a way to talk about creating a sustainable balance for the food system. And one side of that triangle has to be about communicating to consumers and demonstrating our commitment to doing what's right, that we are in fact ethically grounded, that we share consumers' values for things like compassion, responsibility, respect, fairness, and truth. And that those aren't just value statements on a card in the wall somewhere, but those are in fact part of our culture and part of what we live in our systems every single day. The second side of that triangle is about scientific verification. We absolutely do need the independent, objective, measurable, repeatable data upon which to make smart production decisions. We work in industries that measure things to the third point right of the decimal in terms of looking at costs and what the impact will be throughout the entire system. So we need good data upon which to make informed decisions that will help us do the right thing and make smart production decisions. And we also have to be economically viable, because at the end of the day, if the food system is not economically viable, nobody eats. And that is definitely not the right thing for people, and probably not the right thing for animals or the planet. But it's maintaining that balance of being ethically grounded, scientifically verified, and economically viable that will create truly sustainable systems. And where we've run into trouble is when we've let one leg or the other of that triangle get out of balance and it becomes less stable and collapses. Where we put too much emphasis on talking about science and it has to be science-based, or we say, do you have any idea what that will do to my cost structure, when people raise questions about who we are and what we do. Because when people raise issues about today's food system, generally what they're asking is, should you do that? Should you use that technology? Should you keep that many animals in this space? Should you be able to do what you're doing? And historically what we've told them is, science says we can. Can and should are not the same question. Should is a question based on values and ethics. Can is a question based on science, technical verification, or capacity. And so when they ask that value-based question, we need to have a value-based answer. Now, the good news is we generally do have a good values-based answer for that question. We just need to look inside to find what that is. What is the motivation for what we're doing, and can we communicate that and be honest about it in a way that builds consumer trust and confidence in who we are and what we do. The heightened public interest, to me, provides us a wonderful opportunity. There are those in agriculture who had a great deal of concern about Food Inc. being nominated for an Academy Award, and what if it won? That would have been a wonderful opportunity for those of us in the food system to encourage a more robust public discussion about who we are and what we do, because I think what we do is really pretty great for the most part. There may be some things that we might need to look at modifying, but I think for the most part what we do in food production is pretty darn great. And the public has a right to expect us to behave in a responsible manner. They have the right to expect that. Historically we have. But again, as we've changed in size and scale and type of operation, their level of understanding and familiarity with us has decreased pretty dramatically. And so they don't have that same level of confidence that they've had in the past. So the new public interest about food provides us an opportunity to do two things. First of all, look in the mirror. If there are things that we cannot share with the public and feel comfortable in doing, then we might want to change those. We need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves honestly, can I go to someone and talk to them seriously and sincerely about my values and why I'm committed to using this particular system? Is this the right thing to do? Am I comfortable with this, with my value system, defending this particular system? And by and large, I am. There are good reasons for doing the things that we've done, but historically we've talked about them in terms of either science or economics. We haven't given people the shared values to help them understand why we do what we do. The second thing is it gives us an opportunity to tell our story and not simply defend, but engage consumers so they understand our commitment to shared values. They understand our commitment to do what's right while we produce food in a safe, nutritious, and affordable manner for consumers in the U.S. and all around the world. So we've got two great opportunities with this heightened awareness. Look in the mirror and do a better job telling our story. So let's take a look at what it would mean if we were to turn the clock back to 1950 and whether or not that would be the right choice for people, animals, and the planet. Okay? In 1950, we had a U.S. population of about 154 million, 5.6 million farmers, and each farmer produced enough to feed 30 people. Our population in 2009, not quite doubled, but pretty close, almost close to doubled. We were down to 2 million farmers, but the good news is one farmer produced enough food to feed 140 people. So if you kind of take the math and extrapolate from that, what you very quickly become and understand is that the number of farms and the level of productivity had remained constant since 1950, there wouldn't be enough food for 151 million people. Not quite half the population, but let's take the room from here on over. You no longer get to eat. There's no food for you. Okay? Oh, I see some in the back think that might be a good thing for the guy sitting next to you. Okay, that's great. That's great. Maybe for a day or two, but long term, probably not in your best interest. 151 million people equals the 9 largest states in the U.S. So it would be nobody in California, Texas, New York, Florida, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, or Georgia get to eat any longer. It'd be pretty hard to argue that that's the right thing for people, animals, and the planet if we simply wanted to roll production back and slow it down to those levels. Another way to look at that, if we were to farm with the productivity of the 1950s but only had 2 million farms that we have in the U.S. today, at that level of productivity, we'd only have enough food for people in California and Texas. The other 48 states would go without. Probably not the solution we're looking for in terms of what is the ethical choice for people, animals, and the planet. How many in here garden? I love to garden. Gardening's fabulous. There are few things I enjoy more than gardening. Now, I've got a backyard full of black walnut trees that make it really, really hard. So if anybody has any suggestions for how I can prevent them from killing most of the vegetables I'd like to grow, this would be a great place to provide some help to me. You got your own personal extension opportunity this evening for those of you who have an extension assignment. I'd welcome the invitation. But growing your own food is a wonderful thing. It's a great opportunity to experience nature and to share what you grow with family and friends. We have people who bring extra produce into the office and share it with others. It's a great way to build community. It is a wonderful opportunity and something that we ought to encourage and celebrate, both in Michigan and around the country, in urban, suburban, and rural areas, to encourage people to learn more about where their food comes from and get involved in gardening. But let's take a look at one of my favorite summer treats, a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich with a glass of milk, and kind of compare what it would take to produce that in the 1950s and what it would take to produce that today. Okay? Now, for those of you who are particularly industrious, it includes even making the bread. My uncle gave me a recipe for honey bulgur wheat bread that's one of my favorites. The lettuce I never get out of the garden before the rabbits do, but I'm pretty good with the tomatoes. So I've got the bread and I've got the tomatoes. I usually have to buy lettuce or get it at the farmer's market before I can actually produce a BLT. But there are few things that I enjoy more in the summer than a really good BLT with some crisp pepper bacon. It's a real treat. So let's take a look at what it would take to produce a BLT today versus what it would have taken to produce a BLT in the 1950s. Okay? In 1950, each pig required about 2/3 of an acre to be produced. Today, it's about 1/3 of an acre. About half as much land to produce that animal, produce the same quantity of bacon. So in 1950, that would have required the land base equal to Indiana. If we did that today, producing the same volume at those productivity levels, it would take all the land in Indiana and South Carolina to produce the pork that we produce today. In 1950, 2,000 pounds of pork generated about 111 pounds of nitrogen. Today, it's about 67 pounds of nitrogen. So while we've increased our productivity, we've also decreased the environmental footprint in terms of the nitrogen and phosphorus that's produced from all of those animals because we've improved the nutrition and we've enhanced the genetics. So we've made them more efficient converters of the feed that they are given. So we produce more, we're using less to produce that same amount of bacon for the BLT. Housing animals indoors. This may be one where we have a pretty good discussion. Research from the University of Missouri talks about the fact that it is actually now good for the animal. We've always known that it's good for production. We've always known that the science supports it and the economics support it. But what about the values? Is it the right thing to do for the animal to raise the animals indoors? Is it actually better for the animal? Research from the University of Missouri would indicate that that's the case. We've seen a significant drop in disease, in kind of endemic diseases across the swine herd since they've been moved inside, according to the research that compared statistics from 1945 to today. We've decreased or eradicated a number of the more common diseases, and we protect them from weather extremes and predators. So does that mean we endorse everything that happens in contemporary production? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But can you make a good values-based argument that moving the animals indoors has actually enhanced the quality of life for those animals raised for food? I think you can. And that's an argument that I am willing to make. Corn, primary ingredient for pork as well as poultry and cattle. Let's take a look at what it would take to feed that hog that would ultimately produce the bacon for that BLT. In 1950, we produced 3 billion bushels on 72 million acres. We had about 38 bushels per acre as the average annual yield back in 1950 would have taken the landmass of Iowa and Illinois. 2009, 13 billion bushels, 80 million acres. Now we've jumped to 165 bushels per acre as our yield with the landmass of Iowa, Illinois, and Maryland. Now, if we were to change and try to produce the same volume of corn using the productivity levels we had in the 1950, we would need all the land in Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Missouri, Nebraska, and Kansas to produce that level of corn. So is that the right choice for people, animals, and the planet if we want to produce that same level of corn? Okay? Lettuce. Something I always have to purchase because the rabbits get to it in the garden before I do. So whether you produce iceberg or some other type of lettuce, let's take a look at what it would take to produce that lettuce in 1950 versus how we are producing it today. This is statistics from Monterey County, California, one of the areas in the heavy produce belt in California. In 1950, about 59,000 acres produced 11 million plus cartons, 185 cartons per acre. 2007, we've got significantly more land, but now we've gone up from 185 cartons per acre to 889 cartons per acre. 12 times the production on 2.5 times the land. So you can make a pretty good argument that that is, in fact, better for the environment. You're producing more using less, which at the end of the day is part of a definition of sustainability. Tomatoes. Again, from Yolo County, California. Now, you can certainly make an argument, and I will make the argument, that tomatoes from my garden taste better than tomatoes from anybody else's garden because I grew them and I enjoy them. And there are few things my wife and I enjoy more on a Saturday than going to the farmer's market in Kansas City and spending the morning kind of picking through produce and going through the rest of that and really enjoying that. And you can do that, and it's a great opportunity, but not everybody has that opportunity. And it won't necessarily feed all the people that we need to feed. But I can support my garden, I can support the farmer's market, and I can support contemporary, efficient, responsible systems. Those don't have to be in conflict. You can support all of those collectively and very comfortably, knowing that they are ethically grounded, scientifically verified, and economically viable. For the tomatoes in Yolo County in 1950, we were getting about 15 tons per acre. 2008, 41.3 tons per acre. Because of improved production capacity, improved tomato genetics. By the way, we're also using less water for those same tomatoes because we've improved our methods of irrigation. So again, we're producing more using less. Mayonnaise or Miracle Whip? How many were Miracle Whip? Mayonnaise? Okay, I was a Miracle Whip child growing up. My wife was a mayonnaise child, so in our house today we have mayonnaise, of course. So, but I'll still enjoy Miracle Whip from time to time when it's available. But I can have either on my BLT and be just fine. Two primary ingredients in mayonnaise: eggs and some kind of vegetable oil. For the sake of this illustration, we're going to use soybean oil as a way to talk about that. So let's talk about egg productivity, 1950s versus today. Modern housing systems, some people are uncomfortable with them. They don't feel that they're consistent with their values or ethics. But they do provide increased assurance of food safety and egg quality. They have better control over the hen's environment, and they require less land. In terms of egg production, in the 1940s, flock mortality was 40%. Today, it's about 5%. You've got a 35% difference in mortality. it would be pretty difficult to argue, at least from a mortality standpoint, that that wasn't better for the animals. So there are other issues that you might want to discuss, but from a mortality standpoint, you'd have a hard time arguing that. In terms of productivity, about 100 eggs per hen in the 1940s, 265 today. So 281 million laying hens produce 265 eggs a year, or 74 billion eggs in the United States today. If you took those same hens and they only produced 100 eggs per year, we'd have an annual deficit of about 46.3 billion eggs, which would mean somebody wouldn't have access to that source of protein as part of their diet. Because it would be much more expensive, we'd have a significantly reduced supply. We'd also need an additional 7 billion pounds of corn and soybean meal to feed those hens in less efficient systems, and an additional 580,000 acres of land to grow them. So again, is that the right choice for people, animals, and the planet? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. You've got to decide. The great thing is there are choices and options that are consistent with whatever belief you happen to hold. Soybeans. The oil is used for production like mayonnaise. The meal is used in livestock feed as well as hummus that we had out in front. So you've got the opportunity to enjoy those in lots of different forms. But primarily about 98% of the meal is used to feed livestock. Soybean production in the 1950s, 300 million bushels, about 22 bushels per acre, or the land mass of West Virginia, is what it would have taken to grow soybeans in the 1950s. Today, again, 76 million acres, 44 bushels of acre, West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. If you were to take the current yield and roll it back to the 1950 production level, we'd need all the land mass in West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois. Again, is that the right choice? Bread. Got to have good bread if you're going to have a good BLT. About 1 billion bushels produced in 1950, 17 bushels per acre, roughly the land mass of Michigan. Today, guess what? 44 bushels per acre on less land. So we've more than doubled the yield on less land. So we're using less land to produce more wheat, more than twice as much wheat than we did in the 1950s. So we've got our bacon, we've got our lettuce, we've got our tomato, we've got our mayonnaise, some of us might have Miracle Whip, and now we've got our bread all together for our BLT. Let's talk about the milk that's going to go with it. We're going to have a nice cold glass of milk to go with the BLT. 1950, 22 million cows producing about 45,000 plus gallons per cow, and it would have required about 344,000 square miles devoted to dairy. Now, it requires more land mass because at that time more dairy was pasture-based. And so it required more land mass to raise cows and produce dairy back in the 1950s. About the land mass of Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Iowa, and Minnesota. To produce the current level of milk at 1944 rates would require 555,000 square miles, or all the land in those states listed there. Is that the right choice for people, animals, and the planet to consume that many more resources to produce food in the 1950s system? So meeting the challenges. You know, the average corn yield in the U.S., 39 bushels per acre in 1950. By 2000, it was more than 153 bushels. Wheat and soybean productivity more than doubled during that same time frame. So we've continued to increase our productivity using fewer resources to do it every single year. From 1948 to 94, meat production increased 88%. Output of eggs and poultry increased 411%. We now produce 58% more milk using 64% fewer cows than we did in the 1940s. So we've got more productivity from fewer animals using less input. So surely this means we can meet the world's growing demand for food, right? Not quite, if only that were the case. We have record high food insecurity in the United States. Now, that's a much more complex issue than just food supply. There are a lot of other factors that play into food security than food supply. But food supply is one of them. Because as supply shrinks, prices go up. So that is one element that obviously plays into food security. We have the highest recorded rate of food insecurity since 1995, and more than 60% of the 30 million children who participate in the National School Lunch Program receive free or reduced price meals. That's not a place where we want to be as a country long term. And that's at a time when we spend less for food than any other country in the world. We spend about 10% or a little less, depending upon exactly how you calculate the numbers, compared to about half of our income back in 1908. So we spend less for food today, which gives us the privilege of having those wide array of choices. So we can go to Walmart or Whole Foods or McDonald's or Chipotle or the farmer's market or grow our own, or whatever is consistent with our particular needs, set of values, and the available income that we have to spend on food. We have the ability to make those choices. Not everyone does. In fact, over 1 billion people every day around the world are food insecure, 11 million every day in the United States. And by mid-century, we're going to be adding a lot more. So we've got work to be done. 3 billion more people by mid-century, that's about the population of Iran on an annual basis. So we're going to add another Iran every year to the world's population. Or if you want to break that down on a monthly basis, we're going to add 2 cities, Los Angeles and Chicago, to the world's population every month. Or if you want to break it down even further, we're going to add a city the size of Philadelphia every week to the world's population. Now, that begins to change the dynamic in the context of the question, what is the ethical choice for people, animals, and the planet? If we're going to have that many more people to feed with the same available resources we have today, how do we make that happen? How do those of us in agriculture continue to meet that challenge? We've been among the more innovative, creative, resourceful sectors of society. How do we continue to capture that so we can meet this demand? Because in 50 years, we're going to need to double food production. 100% more food. Now, not all of that's going to come from the United States. It shouldn't all come from the United States. But some of it will, and some of the technology that is used to produce food will come from the United States. This is information that I've taken from Jason Clay's World Wildlife Fund presentation, and I hope he'll share it with you with greater detail when he comes to speak to you again. And I would strongly encourage you to go hear Jason. He has a tremendously informed opinion and is extremely well researched on the topic. But according to World Wildlife Fund research, we are currently operating and consuming at about the rate of 1.25 planets. So we're eating our seed today. Not sustainable. If China develops the way it is projected to, we'll be consuming at the rate of 2 planets, which makes it even less sustainable. If all the rest of the developing world continues to develop and continues down the current path of consumption, we'll be at 11 planets. We don't have 11 planets. We have 1, which means we have to continue to produce more using less. We have to produce more using less as the only way to meet the needs of people, animals, and the planet. And there's some significant growth limitations. This is information from the Foreign Ag Office of the United Nations. 80% of future growth has to come from increased yields. We have to figure out ways to increase our productivity just as we have over the last 50 years. We have to continue that trend of increasing our productivity through additional use of innovation, technology, other kinds of activities. About 10 to 15% could be done through higher cropping density, but only 5 to 10% from expansion of land use. And again, when Jason Clay comes to talk, my guess is he's going to share the stories of about, are we going to be better off having more intensive production on agricultural land than continuing to encourage people to farm land on the sides of hills in the developing world where it really should not be farmed, in terms of really protecting the environment and doing what's best for people, animals, and the planet. So what is the ethical choice? This isn't a black and white question. There are no easy answers. On one hand, you've got the Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao saying he has a dream to provide every Chinese, particularly children, sufficient milk each day. And on the other side of the screen, you've got the First Lady talking about her fight against childhood obesity. Both of those are legitimate social concerns and legitimate social problems in which the food system has some role to play. So as we look at that, what is the right choice for people, animals, and the planet? There are a handful of things I would suggest that you can do to begin to become more involved and begin to be more engaged in making those kinds of choices. First, plant a garden and support choice. Choice is a wonderful thing. We have that option here in the United States. You can choose to support food systems that are consistent with your values, whatever they happen to be, with your economic situation, whatever it happens to be, and with your food budget, whatever it happens to be. We have the most affordable food system anywhere in the world, which gives you an incredible array of choice. It gives you the opportunity to exercise your values through the marketplace. And the public has a right to expect the food system to behave responsibly. And when it doesn't, you have a right to call them on it. And we should collectively call the food system on it when they don't behave responsibly. But we need to make informed decisions about what that level of responsibility is and what that truly means. Because we also need to learn more about our food and understand the consequences of policy and market-based decisions. And in today's environment, where brands are really operating as agents of social change, those changes in supply chain decisions can happen much more quickly through the market than they can through public policy. We've done a pretty good job of perfecting gridlock, and our civil discourse is at an all-time low. So we're not likely to get a lot of things moved through public policy, but the marketplace can get things done pretty quickly. When one of the leading brands decides, I want to change a particular practice in my supply chain, that has a dramatic impact on the entire food system very, very quickly. Decisions have consequences. We need to recognize that before we begin asking people to make those decisions. Decisions that limit our ability to increase productivity here or anywhere else around the world ultimately have an impact on food security. They have an impact on hunger here today, around the world today, and for future generations. If we limit our ability to continue to produce more using less, there is an impact on food security and food affordability. And finally, support responsible, efficient food production systems that allow us to produce more using fewer resources to meet the global demand. You can plant a garden. You can support the farmer's market. You can buy organic or natural or whatever is consistent with your values. But you can also do that and support responsible, efficient, contemporary systems that allow us to produce more using less. Those do not have to be in conflict. That can be part of the national discussion as opposed to having two armed camps that are simply shouting past each other about what is a fairly complex issue that has very long implications for the decisions that we make today and in the future for the food system. That really is the ethical choice for people, animals, and the planet. And at the end of the day, when it comes right down to it, my confidence, my sense that we're going to be doing what's right resides with the people that you're seeing go across the screen right now. It's the men and women who are out there every day involved in agriculture, who are making the decisions about what to plant and what to grow and when to harvest and what structure in which they should operate, whether they're a contract grower or an integrator, or they raise pasture raised, or they raise intense production, or whatever system they happen to engage in that is ethically based, scientifically verified, and economically viable. At the end of the day, my confidence and trust is in those men and women to do the right thing, to make the ethical choices for people, animals, and the planet. Because those are the people who are out there living that and making it happen every single day. So with that, I'm going to conclude my prepared remarks. I appreciate your time and attention, and I'd be happy to open it up for questions. Thank you.
As mentioned earlier, I'm going to call on Dr. Karen Clout, Chairperson of Animal Science, to help with questions, because I need to scoot before the questions are over. But thank you, Charlie. Let's have a good open discussion. Get your thoughts on the table.
So, who has questions? What a rousing group, lots of questions. Ted?
Charlie, who would you say is our primary audience when we're trying to communicate?
Great question. Who's the primary audience to whom we should communicate? I think we start with those that we know are interested in food system issues. I think we start with our food customers, food processors, and others. I think we can engage with those who are buyers in the supply system to better understand what's important to them. Not just in terms of price and efficiency, but what else do they value from their supply chain? What are they looking for? And engage them in a discussion so they better understand what it means to you and what your decisions end up meaning to them. Because frequently what I've discovered with buyers in the food system, depending on the company, is they make decisions that are well-intentioned, but sometimes not fully informed. And then historically what we've done in agriculture is we tend to react, and we don't always react in a very positive way. So we could begin that process by engaging with food buyers today. helping them better understand what's important to us, but more importantly, better understanding what's important to them, so that we can continue to build those attributes into our supply system. And they won't always be about cost. Will cost always be a driver? Absolutely. But there are going to be other attributes that the food system is looking for and will look for going forward to help support their brand and others. Obviously, policymakers and those informed consumers who are more interested in food system issues. Identify those consumers online and in other places and engage them in a conversation. Engaging someone in a conversation sounds differently than defending your position. And so it's a willingness to listen as well as engage, as opposed to just tell.
Why is there so much discussion about GMO seed, hybrid seeds?
Well, I think GMO represents one of the technologies that we have used and implemented to enhance productivity. And as people have gotten further and further away from the food system, they aren't necessarily comfortable with the size and scale on our use of technology. It's just one manifestation of that concern. So whether it's GMOs or the use of animal health products or growth enhancements, whatever it happens to be, there's that sense of discomfort with the use of technology. I'm not sure that technology reflects my sense of the values and the ethical commitment that I'm looking for from the food system. I want the food system to be committed to doing what's right. And if I want to learn more about that, I want you to tell me why using GMOs is the ethical choice. I don't want to hear about the science. I don't want to know about field trial data. I want to know why you believe that using GMOs is the ethical choice. Now, I think you can make a pretty compelling case that it is. If it allows us to produce more food in places where food could not be produced, and use fewer inputs, and use fewer pesticides, etc., I think you can make a fairly compelling case. So I think you can make an argument that using GMOs is in fact the ethical choice to do. But you have to express it and engage people in that conversation as opposed to just giving them field trial data. Uh-huh.
And I had a couple issues with the way that you couched everything as a quantitative issue, is that population's growing and we don't have enough to feed people. But the data shows that we produced 4,000 calories per person in the world last year, and within the United States we wasted 40% of the food that we produced. So I guess to me it's a little inconsistent to present our production as a way to remedy hunger when that isn't the issue.
It is part of the issue. I believe it is part of the issue. It is certainly not the only issue. There are a lot of barriers to getting the food that's needed to the people that need it. But production and supply does play a role in food affordability. Absolutely it does. Now, do we have excess calories and do we consume excess calories, particularly in certain areas of the world? No question. But I think those can be and should be addressed distinctly. I don't think you can address them either as a supply issue or as simply a calorie issue. I think you've got to look at it collectively to see, okay, where do we have too many calories? Where do we have not enough calories? How are we going to remedy that? But to simply say supply doesn't play a role in that, I don't agree with that.
I guess my question then would be why corn prices in Mexico have gone up 7 times in the last 10 years, approximately 5 years, when our production has also been at all-time highs.
I don't know the answer to that question.
I guess to me it doesn't seem that all prices are necessarily farm.
No, there are other attributes that are included in the price discussion. No question about that. There are other values that the food system is looking for. But food supply and the ability to produce more using less is a fundamental issue, not just to feed people, but to feed people in a way that also helps us protect and preserve the environment. What's that?
Fair enough. I guess I'm still struggling, and I'll sit down now.
No, these are good questions. This is why we need to have the discussion.
If you're basing a lot of this on land use, the cost of production has a lot to do with inputs and water and all those other things, many of which we do not have an economic value for.
Right.
So, I mean, you didn't mention the dead zone in the Gulf or anything, or carbon outputs, nitrogen but not carbon outputs, or nitrogen inputs in this entire kind of vision of what is utilized in the system. So to me, it's also bringing in those key elements and giving them value, and that's something that, as you did well represent, is an ethical choice, and one that consumers and people who are purchasing the food need to be aware of?
No question. And I think all of those attributes need to be part of the discussion, but it needs to be considered as a holistic review of what are the input costs, all of the inputs, what are the output costs, all of the outputs, and then what is the best balance of those looking at the entire system. But we've tended to promote it as either it is big or it is small. One is good, one is bad, depending on your perspective. I think that's a poor way to approach the discussion.
As far as GMOs, thus far though, our most commonly used one is Roundup Ready soy in the U.S. and that one's not one that's reducing inputs and hasn't shown a great increase in yields. So I think it's careful that we don't overstate what we've been able to accomplish with GMOs. So BT, corn, and cotton certainly.
Right, but there are also some GMOs that because of other issues have not gone to market that may have had a different outcome in other parts of the world. I'm sorry?
There's the lab.
No, not today. Not today.
I guess sometimes when I discuss food production with people, especially who may not view the contemporary production as in a positive light, they often talk about, the buy the local, the eat local, get rid of monoculture, and shipping grain around the world. When you're having those discussions with people, I sometimes feel like they feel that they view that we can have food production with no environmental impact. And my question is, how do you argue to them? What is the price of life? What is the price of maybe, okay, we're going to take out, maybe there's going to be a little bit more phosphorus eutrophication in this lake, but what is the price of life if that little increase in that lake is going to be feeding 10,000 people in another country?
Yeah. I guess the first thing I would suggest is that we try not to engage in it as an argument, because that's what we've done, and that's gotten us, I think, to where we are today. If we can say, look, I understand that what's important to you is preserving the environment. That's important to me too. And I think we can achieve both. I think we can preserve the environment and produce an adequate supply of food. If you want to buy your food locally and that's consistent with your values, I think that's great. But I also think we have the need to have more intensive production that produces larger volumes to meet the needs of others. And we can do that in a way that doesn't have a negative environmental impact. So I don't believe that it's either or. I think we can do both, but I think we got to have a discussion instead of an argument. Yeah.
What about the food transportation? That's always, for example, I see in several agricultural countries, you throw a lot of food, and it is not because there's not people that need that food. It seems like an excess, but it's a lot of times the food cannot be moved from point A to point B. So that's always like a question, Does the world, like a global, has the infrastructure to be able to move all that production from point A to point B?
Yeah, the question was about infrastructure and transportation of food. I think we do have, and you will also hear people make the argument that food miles and the transportation of food is actually causing a negative environmental impact. So I think you can look at ways to enhance efficiency in terms of food transportation to provide food to the most number of people with the smallest environmental impact as a legitimate goal, as a legitimate objective, and then try to design systems that make that happen. The infrastructure does exist to transport food. There's no question about that. We transport food all over the world all the time. And that's one of the conversations that people have about should you only buy what's in season, et cetera, as one of those value choices that people make. But we transport food all over the world all the time. That infrastructure does exist. Yes?
A lot of the arguments that is made by the people against the big food is that with this incredible yield of production, we also kind of move into monocultures, and that these monocultures in and out of themselves might be a risk at some point if something goes wrong with them, and that the loss of diversity around the world in food diversity is actually a very big issue. What would you tell these people?
Yeah, I understand that argument. I don't have a deep appreciation for it. I don't share that same level of angst about it. It was interesting, I was talking to somebody from South Dakota that had just seen Food Inc. and came away and said, that's amazing that corn is in all those products. That's incredible. as opposed to looking at it as corn is in all those products, that's a real challenge. So I guess some of it depends on the perspective that you bring to the table about what is the level of diversity that is supportive of your values and of the system that you want to support. But I don't see the inherent danger in continuing to find new uses for existing products.
I meant it more in the way of seed. Like, we plant all the same. I mean, if you look, for example, at South America, there's a huge diversity of corn. Like, two neighbors, they won't have the same variety. In the U.S., it's all the same. Or mostly the same. And a lot of people see a danger in that.
Right. And we've continued to develop and develop different hybrids on an ongoing basis. So again, I appreciate the argument and the concern about diversity. I've not seen it manifest itself as an issue.
I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Two, and they're unrelated, but I want to ask them both, and you can think about them both. One, with this ethical issue, who gets to make these ethical decisions? Because each of us have our own personal values, but what's happening is in the food chain, others are making ethical decisions for us. How do we decide who gets to make those decisions? That's number one. The other is, I'm going to use Oreos as an example because I love Oreos. Why isn't, when you look at Oreos, which doesn't have the value that a piece of meat has in terms of nutrition, why aren't we having really the same level of debate over Oreos or other packaged foods, which really are, we can call them empty calories for the sake of the discussion. Why isn't that debate going at the same level that some of the debates are happening in relation to agricultural production? So,
Well, to the second question, I think it is. I think we may be exposed more to certain parts of the discussion than others.
yeah, Michael Pollan will talk about some of those issues.
Right, right. But if you go to other meetings and other places, the packaged goods and empty calories nutrition are hugely important.
The human sense of nutrition,
Right.
that you do, for sure. I mean, you talk about them in terms of nutrition. But I don't see the debate about the value, the ethical value in the same way other than we get fat in terms of production and some of those.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is really, are people challenging ethically those who produce those kinds of packaged goods the same way they're challenging those who produce other products?
Right. That's why the questions are related, the two ethical questions are related. Who gets to decide the ethics, and what are the ethics of producing food that really is designed for satisfying your taste bud but doesn't provide that much else?
Right. I mean,
Usually using a lot of packaging.
I think in the U.S., each of us has the opportunity to make those ethical decisions based in part on our values and based in part on our budget. Some people have more ability than others. The other thing that I think is really happening is you've got buyers in the food chain that are really making those decisions for others on a more frequent basis. So you've got folks in the food chain that are really beginning to make those decisions much more so than policymakers in a lot of cases.
And is that good or bad?
I think it's a cause for concern because you've got folks who may or may not have, a wide array of information and be well informed. You know, I've worked with food companies that are incredibly well informed and incredibly thoughtful and reflective on the decisions they've made, and I've worked with others that this seems like a good idea, why not? And so I think, again, it's an opportunity to engage the food system in more of that discussion.
Charlie, how do you see the question of subsidies being shaped in the future? And how do you see that discussion going forward?
I think the political reality is we're going to see a significant reduction in subsidies going forward. I think if you look at the political landscape, I think it's going to be very difficult. Now, obviously, it depends on what your time frame is. But I think it will be very difficult politically to maintain subsidies, the historical level of subsidies that we've seen in agriculture. Very difficult.
I'm puzzled about your statement about us having this wonderful opportunity to make our own choices, because I think that there are a large number of people in our country in particular that aren't making those choices, or don't have the opportunity to make those choices, including school children who are eating subsidized
Right.
school lunches.
Yeah, school lunch would be probably the place where there is the least opportunity to make that choice. But in most other settings, when people go to make food purchasing decisions, they do have choice. It may be limited by their resource, but they do have some choice in making that. It may be conscious or it may be less conscious, but they do have that choice, but it is constrained by the amount of resource they have available to them. Yes.
I come to the conclusion that the other side is afraid of big ag for the same reason that we are afraid of like HSUS, because we can grasp them, that's like we can't really get a hold of them. So what can big ag or those companies or corporations do to become more accessible or be more visibly or more show more what they do and what they really be about, and how can they show more responsibility?
Transparency, observability, and a willingness to engage. You know, a willingness to talk about who you are and what you do and answer questions. Lots of places you can do that online to find consumers who are interested in food system issues. Lots of ways to share more about what's going on in your operation and answer any of the concerns that may exist. Now, you aren't going to convince everybody. I mean, anybody that's more than about 1.5 standard deviations from the mean is likely fairly committed to their particular perspective, whatever it happens to be.
But I think there's a difference between a person talking, working for a company, and I think they can get along, at least have a discussion with another person from, let's say, the other side, on an opposing view. But I think if it comes back to the company still is not that person. Those are many persons that one really can.
Yeah, but I think if you think about it from a company perspective, having as many people willing to engage as possible is really in everybody's long-term best interest. If you only allow a single spokesperson who goes out and talks on behalf of the company to the media, that historically has been the strategy. But allowing employees and others to engage with consumers and truly engage, I think ultimately will be in the long-term best interest.
A couple of questions. To go back to Karen's example with why is there no ethical controversy about Oreos? My answer is there was. You had that number, the year 1908 up there. That's a very interesting year. That was the year that the Pure Food and Drug Act passed. And if you don't think it was an ethical question whether people had the right to sell milk mixed with plaster as milk, that was as much of an ethical question as we're having here today. We settled the Oreos question long ago. Now, we didn't deal with the question of portion size, obesity, and all of that. But we dealt with the ethical questions about Oreos long ago. We did everything you talked about up there in terms of raising productivity and in terms of decreasing the percentage of income that Americans spend on food. We did all of that in the face of radical changes in ethical considerations. We outlawed pesticides that today we would laugh if anybody brought them forward. They were so dangerous. We dealt with things like pure food and drugs when big food was telling us, man, you just wait, this is going to cost you a fortune. The question that I have is society goes through this all the time. Mr. Tone, I'm so disappointed that you would raise the question of whose life? You know the answer to that question from my class. Who's more valuable in life? Is it your life we're talking about or mine? That's the political question. And on the GMO front, the fundamental problem, it seems to me, is that food, genetically modified food, has not shown a demonstrable benefit for consumers. The same consumer who will refuse to eat GMO food will go use a GMO drug without question, because they get the demonstrable benefit of controlling the diabetes, reducing their cholesterol, whatever. Until the input suppliers solve somebody's problem besides weed control in Iowa, we're not going to have a rational discussion about GMOs. We're not. Because weed control in Iowa is not a problem for a parent with children in Escondido, California. It's just not. And we can't make it their problem no matter how much we try to educate them. Am I too cynical?
Well, I don't think education is, I think it's got to be engagement. I think it's changed. I think the dynamics have changed in terms of it's not just information that people are looking for, but I agree with you that there has to be some perceived personal or societal benefit for adoption of technology.
It's not that simple either, though, because I can think of a few cases, and one is golden rice. It's
Yep.
just the rice that was supplemented that really would have made a difference in terms of blindness in areas that are vitamin A.
And now we're back to Mr. Toad's question. That is a great innovation. If my children are threatened by river blindness,
Which there's lots of areas of the country there.
in the U.S.,
Not in the U.S., but both.
that's
for
my
sure.
question.
Hundreds
Your
of
life
millions.
or mine?
Yeah.
And we don't want to talk about it, but that's the root of this. Golden rice was the example I was going to use. It's a demonstrable benefit to people threatened by river blindness.
Yeah.
That parent in Escondido is not threatened by river blindness.
Right.
Now tell me why I should have GMOs in my food. This is not a question of my own personal preferences. This is a question of where I see the issue is at.
But that's why I asked who makes the ethical decisions.
Exactly.
Because that's what happened in that case. I mean,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how do you get people to think beyond their own personal self-interest? That's very difficult.
yeah, Ajit.
Do you think we are victim of our own successes? I mean, if we were paying 50% for food today in this country, would we be having these discussions?
No. We wouldn't.
Only I think issues will go away.
Yeah. Yep.
Any last questions? Okay, then we'd like to thank Charlie once again for